I'm so excited to introduce Sam Larson, who's principal technologist here with Expedient, and also Parham Shabaniani, who's an architect at Nutanix, to talk through the essential guide to Nutanix DRaaS. Sam, Parham, welcome to the show.
Thanks, AJ.
Thank you, AJ.
So, Sam, I think we kind of have a moment to really talk about Nutanix DR. All right, we've seen a huge amount of increase in this space and people desiring to see this space. What do we see from a DR standpoint with Nutanix?
So imagine it's 2 a.m. You get the call, everything is down. Your entire business app stack is down. Your stakeholders are going to be pissed in the morning. You can't run payroll. You can't process month end. And not only are all your apps down, but your entire IT stack is down as well. So you can't even see what the problem is or where it is or begin to troubleshoot it. And you're on the hook. What are you going to do? Do you feel confident in this scenario that you are going to have everything back up by tomorrow morning and running successfully, or are you going to be working on your resume tomorrow? If it's the latter, if you're at all concerned it's the latter, you come to the right place. We can help you. As AJ said, Sam Larson. I'm a principal technologist. Working on Nutanix at Expedient. I work on our Nutanix product line, which includes Nutanix DR as a service. I've been in the cloud services industry for about 20 years, and working very closely with Nutanix for the last 5+ and working on DR a lot of that time, because as I said earlier, DR is a great place to work with a service provider. And with me is Parham. Parham, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So I'm Parham Shabaniani. I'm an architect here on the service provider team at Nutanix. I've been in Nutanix for just under 4 years. Been on Nutanix for a decade, and I've been in the industry for about 20 years. So I come to Nutanix not with just the service provider experience, but representing a lot of the use cases our partners have. And when Sam and I kind of sunk up on this was a great opportunity, as AJ noted, to kind of precursor the scenario. Nutanix has DR integrated to the platform, and so we see a lot of traction there. And secondly, Nutanix also is heavily pushing towards our partners to build DR into their stacks, and that's why Sam and I are here today.
And I think this is where we've gotten this recognition from Nutanix, right? We are the Nutanix Service Provider of the Year for 2025 for the Americas. This is a big honor, but it's also a recognition of the work that our team, Sam, Justin Cobbett, the entire delivery and operations teams have done to show not only the commitment to delivering Nutanix as a service, but also making sure that there's the best DR as a service offering from a service provider with Nutanix. This is a true testament to the work, but also I think from Sam's experience working in DR, this is something that everybody needs, but it's not something that everybody's like desiring to invest in. It's an oh no option, right? It's not the I need this for my everyday use. And I think our offerings as we go through this shows that value, but shows how you can get there in a much more cost-effective manner.
So this presentation was originally written to be delivered at .next. And as such, we wanted to make sure that the audience knows who Expedient is. Hopefully, if you found your way to the webinar version of this presentation, you already know and can easily reference the Expedient website. But a couple key points in here are that, as the last slide showed, we are the Service Provider of the Year for the Americas for 2025. Nutanix's Service Provider of the Year. We are a champion level service provider, which is relevant to further content in this presentation. And we have a suite of Nutanix-based cloud services, including private cloud, DR as a service, and edge compute.
I think this is, I hope that all of you who are on this have heard this story a few times, at least from me. But this is definitely something where we take a lot of pride. We've never really talked about our Net Promoter Score of 71. That's actually really, really good. Nutanix is in the high 80s, low 90s usually.
We're currently at 91.
Yeah, so
Nutanix is for a decade.
Yeah, and this is a testament to their support and their services. It also shows that we care a lot about our customers, that that our clients want to tell other clients that, hey, this is really, really great service that they're getting from us. And just case in point, think about a cable provider and they're down in like the tens. So way on the opposite side of that in terms of being able to provide that service. But this is also a really great, overview of who we are. And we haven't really talked about that overall, the client retention rate, MSP 501. These are big recognitions for us.
Yeah, and the interesting thing with that, AJ, also is reason why both the Expedient score and the Nutanix score matters in the context of DR is if and when the event does happen, you pick up the phone, you call someone, what is that going to be like in terms of their support, their callback, all those things, right? And that's why these scores really matter from a customer's perspective, because from their view, to your point and Sam's point, DR is a when, not an if. And when that occurs, typically, as Sam noted, there's so many things going on. You want your partners to be attached to you to help you go through that exercise. That's why the Net Promoter Scores matter so much, in terms of what your guys' score is to your customers and what our score is to you. That means we provide the service combined as two partners to the end customer to get them back to where they need to be.
So this is our agenda for today. We're first going to talk about the stakes of DR generally and DR as a service. We're going to go through some of the essentials to what makes up Nutanix DR as a service. We will talk about some of the key decision points as you build out your DR environment. And then we'll talk about how to choose the right service provider if you're going to go that route. The stakes of DR are, it is really expensive in today's day and age to have downtime. The stats in the upper right corner there, $14,000 per minute, come from a Splunk's investigation into the hidden costs of downtime. And that was just for like a mid-sized business. It can be significantly more for a business that is heavily reliant on their tech stack, like a tech business or a larger company. And the sources of downtime are many, or sorry, the sources of the cost of downtime are many. So lost revenue, lost trust, lost productivity, fines, penalties. So it's really something to be avoided. And then in the lower left, about 55% of data center operators have had an outage in the past 3 years. And the most common cause of outages is just a power outage. So it's not like really like exotic things that are happening. It's not tornadoes and hurricanes. It's just, well, maybe some of the power outages were, but it's power outages and the generator didn't kick on right, or it ran out of gas or something. UPS failed, the switch failed. So it happens, and it happens frequently. You can only build in so much redundancy to your data center.
And I will
So
say that
really, you want to be ahead of it.
if you saw our webinar back in May, where we talked about co-location and all the things that we do to make sure that our generators fire, that our UPSs work, those are all the things that it takes to do that. And a lot of folks who are running their own data centers may not do in any given month. They may not do those in any given year. And then, as Sam mentioned, when that generator goes to fire and there's no gas in the tank, or they haven't done a power on test, or they haven't tried to move things over to UPS to go to generator, you have failures when it actually counts. And these are the sorts of things that, like you mentioned here, 55% of data center operators have had outages in the past 3 years. These are the things that we spend a lot of time thinking about so that we're not part of that 55%.
And contrary to that, AJ, doesn't mean, I think the other way of looking at it is that if you're a customer that's in a hosting data center, doesn't mean that just because you're in a hosting data center, all those things as you guys are doing really well at Expedient, other data center providers and operators are doing, right? So the need for protecting your workloads, even though it's not in your own hosting class data center, it's in some third-party partners, there's still a need for it, just based on the fact that we see the frequency that occurs at the clip that it's occurring at.
So also here we have a stat that about 59% of organizations were hit with ransomware in 2024. While DR can be part of your ransomware response, it probably is not the optimal approach to ransomware protection. If you can have a recovery at the same data center, that is preferable if you have technology in place. If you don't, DR can double as a ransomware defense. But where the relevancy really comes from there is that has driven increased costs in cyber insurance and increased demand from the cyber insurers for recovery plans, including disaster recovery. So a lot of orgs need to have disaster recovery in place to get the insurance rates that they can afford. So when you think about DR, if you have an on-prem environment, on-prem private cloud running in your data center today, and you want to add DR, that is a huge project. You're talking about hundreds of decisions. How are you going to replicate? What servers are you going to buy? How are you going to connect the networks together? And that's just getting the infrastructure in place. On top of that, you need to think about everything that we're going to talk about today in terms of how to actually successfully accomplish DR. And as AG said earlier already, all of those decisions, all of the research that goes into each of those decisions is for something that you're hoping you're never going to use. And it's not going to immediately add value to your business other than maybe checking a box somewhere and, like I said, reducing your cost of insurance. So it's a really great option for outsourcing and to make all of that complexity go away for you, make one decision and let someone else handle all of that complexity. And you can focus on the things that are going to more immediately add value to your business and have someone there to help when you need it. Nutanix software makes parts of this easier. They make the replication and recovery about as easy as you can make it, especially with the DR software being built in. But working with a service provider still makes your life about 30,000 times easier.
I mean, I think the biggest piece of all of that is a lot of the decisions are also around buying hardware. Where do I put that? Do I have a second site? I now have to maintain this entire second stack all the time. And again, coming back to a thing that you hopefully never need to use, I think part of the other value proposition of using a DRaaS provider, specifically Expedient, is that we're taking care of the actual infrastructure. We already have data centers with good power, good network connectivity that is going to work. And we do DR as a service. It is literally our jobs to do it versus part of a job that you hope to never have to do. So I think that's the other part, is that we are experts in doing disaster recovery and getting workloads back up and online quickly. And that's why I think not just removing the decision tree of, okay, well, what do we buy here and where do we put this? It's making it a lot easier to consume, and also knowing that there is a set of experts on the other side to help you get recovered at the end of the day.
Yeah. I think an overlooked part of that is that when you do it yourself, you're doubling the footprint of data center networking and data center infrastructure that your team is responsible for managing. So are you going to also be hiring people just to manage your DR side, or hoping that like your IT team has bandwidth to automate it to gain back that efficiency? It really is a big lift.
All right. So as Sam denoted, Nutanix does come with DR kind of out of the box. And what does that look like from a perspective of how that's integrated into Nutanix? And it's very straightforward. And Nutanix, our software stack includes basic DR out of the box, and that supports multiple replication technologies depending on which you've licensed. But in this diagram, what we're showing is that you have a production environment with our management plane Prism paired up to a remote cluster, which is hosted by Expedient here in their data center, and we're replicating from source to target. Pretty straightforward, no additional complexities and whatnot, minus the fact that replicating your workloads is just probably the beginning of your DR journey. There are many other caveats to building a DR service and ultimately bringing that service to an end customer so that they can have their services protected more so than just their workloads protected. And since we talked about kind of it does come out of the box, when we look at our Nutanix portfolio of products, basically what you see here is in our starter packaging, we have basic async replication included with DR. And as we move up our software stack, you get additional features that come out of DR, including self-service restore capabilities and then advanced replication technologies, along with full runtime protection modeling that you can do, which gives you the means of basically building recovery plans and having workloads power on in different sequences, different boot cycles, and the whole 9 yards to really bring your service back to life in a DR state.
One note is that on our side, we are providing NCI Ultimate. So you have access to all of those capabilities on our side. So if you're in our data center doing production, doing DR to another data center, you don't have to worry about whether or not we have the right licensing. We do. But in this particular instance, we also make sure that when we're talking with clients is making sure that they have the right licensing to get to the outcome that they're looking for, right? If they want near sync, we have to make sure that they have the right licensing so that they can do that replication and that failover. But part of this is not just the licensing and the hardware, it's actually putting it all together. And the last line item there of the runbook automation is really where we start to put together the protection groups and monitoring those pieces that take it from just I have a second place to land workloads to I have an actual disaster recovery service.
Right.
And if you're sitting there thinking like, does the infrastructure I already own support DR? The answer we know is yes, because at whatever tier you started, all you need is to sign up for a service provider to start taking advantage of a DR as a service offering. It's really just a matter of like, how much of the features are you going to use? But at the very least, you're already enabled to do some level of DR.
Yeah, and it just gets into what level of service you're looking for, and that's what we'll be talking about as we go forward through the rest of this presentation, which is what are the other elements of DR. So to Sam's point, basic packaging does include DR. The additional packaging that, especially with what Expedient offers, is they give you a lot more advanced features, and ultimately we'll talk about those features as we go forward. And so what we see here is a bit of a use case where we're using multiple technologies around DR. And so what we're doing here is we're showing both your on-prem environment as a customer, a hosted site where Expedient offers services, and we'll talk about how many sites Expedient has, because they have quite a few sites of service they offer this DR under. But basically we're showing native replication that it typically would fall into an RPO low to mid tier, where you have an RTO requirement that is reasonable, and therefore you want to have a low to mid tier RPO where you're replicating directly to a target. With that being said, when we look at workloads within your cluster, do all of them fit that low to mid tier RPO requirement? In many cases, you might have other workloads like testing workloads, QA workloads, development workloads that usually wouldn't fall under the production status, and therefore, could there be a need to want to protect them? Yes, but not at the frequency or whatnot that you would have at a production service. So what we offer at Nutanix is ability to mix our technologies, which Expedient is doing, and allowing you to bring in different technologies to achieve an outcome, which is protecting all the workloads with different tiers of RPO. So we use, for our mid to long-term RPOs, we're using an S3 object store to target where all those snapshots are being replicated to, and they'll be hydrated to that cluster that is being depicted here under the DR site. And of course, the beauty of all that is it's all done through one interface, as you can see on screen here.
I think the other side of this is when you mention test dev, in my experience, everybody says, oh, it's just test dev. We can just shut that down in a DR event. Your developers will be very, very upset when the actual disaster happens and you have now failed over and that's the only site that's available and they can't bring up their test workloads. They will get very, very upset that like test was not part of that story. So do consider that as part of that mid-long RPO structure, and also think about longer RPO for longer term retention. This is something that comes up where you have the replication of, I have stuff on one side, I want it actively replicated to another side, I want to be able to press a button and turn everything on. But that journaling time can sometimes be kind of short in terms of how long I have from that replication to go back in time, especially in something like a ransomware event. So bringing in backups as well to that allows you to kind of blend the longer term retention with the native in-house replication to get the best of both worlds. And that's something that we help a lot
achieving an
with.
outcome, right, AJ, is achieving an outcome, and in many cases you can get to that outcome in many different ways. And you know, to your point, and a clear example of that is simply a use case where you could have a workload with a low to mid RPO also be in the mid to long term RPO because you're using it for a business continuity or outcome, which is I might have a ransomware event, and we'll be talking about that actually through the rest of the presentation too, where those are events that do trigger DR scenarios. And the whole point there is in Nutanix's technology, our S3 technology is worm capable. So very much so in terms of being able to protect those workloads and in a worm state where a ransomware event could have been triggered. And that's invoking a DR scenario, right? The event is invoking the DR scenario. And you might need to, you know, typically the period of time at that point becomes really relevant because you don't know when the ransomware event occurred and you're trying to do that through your discovery. All right. So we've talked about Expedient status as a service provider year for Americas for Nutanix. Let's talk about what Nutanix's service provider partner program is in many cases. And we kind of have different tiers of our service provider program. And for Expedient to be a champion, they're carrying many and multiple badges. And you're seeing some examples of that on our screen. It starts all the way from an associate tier to expert and master tiers at Nutanix. So the point here is from Nutanix, our certification program is a top 5 recognized program now in the industry. And to be a service provider at Nutanix, let alone to be a champion service provider at Nutanix, you have to carry multiple badges to show your level of experience and expertise around our products and services here at Nutanix. And Expedient definitely carries multiple badges that you see on this screen to fall into our champion status.
All right, so I'm going to talk about DR as a service in a little bit different, from a different angle here, and talk about kind of the journey of selecting and deploying DR as a service. And I'm going to start with making a recommendation based on my years of experience in the service provider industry that not a lot of companies follow, but the ones that do see really great success. And that is when you're choosing a service provider, try to choose the service provider before you sign up for the service. Evaluate the service provider for fit with your organization, ask them questions, figure out culturally, technically, service-wise, and price-wise, which service provider is going to be the best partner for your business, and then work on the details of the service. When you try to combine what I have broken out into phases 1 and 2 here, you're going to end up trying to compare apples and oranges across 3 different quotes and probably just pick the least. And it's very likely that some important business requirements or other important partnership requirements are going to get dropped in favor of saving a few bucks on what might just be a lower value service. So figure out the service provider who is the best fit for your organization. Work with that service provider to build out the solution to fit whatever problem you're trying to solve. In this case, we're talking about DR, so meeting your DR business requirements. Post-signature, you're likely going to go through some sort of delivery project, depending on the level of customization in your solution. That could be almost instantaneously delivered all the way to weeks or months with a PM being involved, steering you to getting that solution in place. But this phase 4 here is really important, especially with DR. An untested DR is a hope, not a plan. So before you consider any DR as a service project complete, a successful test should be run. And we do that as part of our DR as a service offering here at Expedient. And then finally, and shouldn't be overlooked, you go into a support phase. So a lot of work goes into getting the service up and ready, but it takes a lot of work to keep it ready and make sure that it's going to be successful when you need it. So that includes doing annual DR tests. We offer 2 a year as part of our DR as a service offering, and making sure that changes to your environment are mirrored in DR and the replication is constantly working and staying up to date so that you know that when you need to do DR, it's going to be there and it's going to be successful. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just the value proposition of doing DR as a service with Nutanix, starting with the Nutanix value proposition. So if you're running Nutanix in production, You already know this, and if you're not, this is why you should. Nutanix has a unified platform to run anything, anywhere. It works for on-prem, at the edge, in the cloud. You can run VMs, containers, apps, data, AI, and it is both cost-effective and scalable. Increasingly, and at significant scale now, your software vendors are already publishing Nutanix as a supported platform for their software. So you don't need to worry about being the first person to try to run your app on this on AHV. It's going to work out of the box. And as we talked about earlier, and part of what makes Nutanix a great partner for Expedient is the alignment around customer satisfaction and that consistent 90 NPS experience they provide. So now doing DR with Nutanix, we talked a little bit about this, but DR is included out of the platform. It's not sold separately. And the DR that is included, it has powerful automation and orchestration, and it provides flexibility with options all the way from MST on the higher RTO standpoint to Metro, which is fully synchronous. And now we take all of that and add a service provider to the picture. And as we discussed earlier, you prevent yourselves from needing to make lots of choices and purchases to stand up a second environment, second everything, second colo, second network, second infrastructure. And service providers, not only are they providing all of that for you, but they have experience providing all of those seconds that you just can't replicate. You're doing it once, they're doing it many times for many customers. And that's across every phase of this project, from architecting DR to migrating if there's a migration involved, to the various different approaches to testing and actually doing tests, and then especially actually doing DR failovers. Hopefully you don't have a lot of experience with that, but if they're running at any sort of scale, they probably do.
Yeah, this is actually
Another advantage
something
of
that
working.
this is
Oh,
actually
go ahead.
something that we've done a lot of in the last year in 2024. We did about 200 DR tests with our clients. We do tests all the time. We know what to expect. We help build runbooks as part of the service, and we did not have, I think we had one failure, and it was because an application didn't come up properly. The VM did, but the app didn't come up properly. I think because the app server came up before the database server and they had to do some reboots. But we were able to get 175 plus, 200 some plus tests completed last year. We have a team of people who work on the weekends, who work in off hours because that's when people want to do DR tests. We have clients who do full failovers and they run in one site for 6 months and they run their other site for 6 months. We can do that across the platform. And I think that's what makes working with a service provider so beneficial, because you're not the one who has to figure it all out. We figured it out over and over again and have people who do this over and over again. I can probably change the oil on my car. It's going to take me a lot longer than going to the oil change place down the street who does it literally all day long, has every single tool, has a rack, has all the things to do it right. And I'm going to fight with myself in the driveway for 4 hours. They're different scenarios. I'm getting the same outcome. The oil is going out of my car and the new oil is going in, but they know how to do it over and over and over again. And it also means that we know all the little things that will probably jump up and bite you, things like network configuration. And we'll talk about network configuration here in a moment, but these are the sorts of things of what networks do you have? Do you have all those configured? When you do a failover, are they coming up on the right networks? Do you have to re-IP? You shouldn't have to re-IP. These are all the pieces that go into that story that, if you're trying to figure this all out yourself, is yet more work on top of all of the work that you're already doing today. Let people who do this all the time handle that for you.
Yeah, and AJ, two quick things I'll add. With the example that you just brought, that's very, very important. You know, as Sam will be saying, as we'll be saying for the rest of this webinar, testing, testing, testing matters, right? And the second thing along with the testing is the fact that since you guys provide ultimate licensing, you have access to that runbook mechanism. And that runbook mechanism is important because at the end of the day, as a customer, is the recovery of the VM what's important, or is the recovery of the service important? And that's why the runbooks matter, because to your example, you had one service come up before the other, and that probably needed a little bit of discovery through testing, and testing flushed it out that, wait a minute, we need the database up before we need the app up. And that can easily be resolved through the runbook and the sequence of how those VMs come online.
And like things like, hey, the database actually takes a minute and a half to come up, not the minute we thought. And so the app server came up first,
Right.
even though they were both up and they were both fine. It took longer, and that's the series of events that breaks. And you're right, testing is where you figure those things out before you actually have to do a full failover.
Yeah, you validate the time sequence, and then you can put time sequencing into your boot sequence along with those recovery plans so that those services come up cleanly. And it's really important. I think this is a perfect example, and this is exactly where Sam is going to get into a little bit more deeper, which is why these things ultimately matter. Testing flushes out those scenarios, because at the end of the day, when you're delivering an SLA back to your business, the business is going to be more concerned about, hey, how do I get my services back? Not that I got all my VMs powered up.
Yep. So 2 more points on this that can be easily overlooked. One is that DR is a highly variable workload. When you're doing it yourself, you are probably building to capacity to run your entire environment, but with service providers, there may be options to do burstable architectures in your DR environment so that when you are not using it, you are not paying for the full size of all the infrastructure required to run production. That is an option with Expedient. So service providers, by being able to offer burstable services, can reduce your total cost of DR compared to doing it yourself. And then the last one is when you are in the chaos of a data center outage, like I talked about at the very beginning, you don't want to be thinking about trying to figure out how to recover everything on your own. Having someone who has your back in that event, and not only has your back, but recovering to DR sites is a routine for them. And it's just their like daily work that they do every day, is going to make that feel a lot more comfortable and drastically increase your chances of a successful and efficient recovery. All right, so now we're going to talk about some of the key decision points around DR. We've hinted at a few of these already, so let's dive right into them. The first one we're going to talk about is testing strategy. There are a lot of different testing strategies, but I've tried to boil it down somewhat here to the 4 most common approaches I see. I'm just going to talk a little bit about each one of them. So the first one is no testing. That is valid, although not great option. The completeness of that option is none. So if you're not testing, you don't know if you have recovery point objective that you can hit at all, and you don't know what your RTO is going to be. And I understand, like, having been in operations for many years, that like IT is hard and you have to make trade-offs constantly. But I think you can make a slightly better trade-off here than doing no testing and get at least some of the value out of your DR environment that you're hoping to get. So the next option is just doing a test boot. So this is a really lightweight test, but it is going to provide a lot of value. So we're talking about like very little effort. You're turning on VMs in DR, not connecting them to the network. You're logging in, you're seeing that the data is there. That's what a test boot is. And if you're doing a test boot, you at least have validated your RPO. You don't have a good sense of what the RTO is. You don't know how long it's going to take, to Parham's point, to reconstruct your services out of the VMs and data that are there, but at least you know you can get there because the VMs and the data are there. The replication is working. The next option is a bubble test. This is the most common option that we see customers doing. It involves constructing a network bubble in the target site, the DR site, bringing VMs online within that network bubble, and then trying to reconstruct services to the degree you can within a bubble. They can't talk to, say, like your Salesforce instance or like other internet-facing integrations. But hopefully you can rebuild at least partial functionality to do some more valid application level testing within that bubble. So now you're validating your RPO, and you're not 100% sure what your RTO is, but you at least are starting to get a sense of it when you do a bubble test. One thing I would call out on this one is that it can be in some ways higher in technical complexity than failing over. You are constructing a network bubble, and then you're being very careful to make sure data is not leaking out of that bubble, because you don't want, say, some random database updates or Active Directory updates to sneak out of that bubble and screw up your production. Because when you're doing a bubble test, you're not telling your stakeholders that you're going to be offline because you're going to be doing the test in a bubble. So it does take some care, especially the first time you're doing it, to make sure you do it right and don't impact anything. But because it doesn't involve taking production offline, it is typically lower business impact and a test that is more available to IT teams to do. So we see a lot of companies doing bubble tests, either as their only testing approach or at least their primary testing approach. Then the last test option obviously is a full failover, and that means actually running out of your DR, running your production environment out of the DR site for some period of time, whether it's a day, a week, a month, or as AJ said, we have some customers doing half the time out of DR, and they just every quarter switch back and forth. If you're doing this, you're going to know exactly what your RPO is, exactly what your RTO is, and it's the best from a testing strategy, and knowing that your business has the continuity it is looking for, it is the best approach. But there is impact. Moving your whole business from one site to another, your whole, at least IT stack from one site to another, is going to have some impact. So it takes getting buy-in from the organization and making sure everyone understands the value of the test.
But if you can do it, you know that it works
Yeah.
every time. And that is something that we have seen. I've also seen bubble tests. One of the big challenges with bubble tests is there's some things that you kind of have to, I don't want to say fudge in a bubble test, but email access. If you're using Office 365, you don't have DR email, right? That is a public cloud service. You don't have access to that. So there are some things that you need to do in a bubble test in order to make sure that things are working, and that you wouldn't do in the actual event of a failover. So these are the sorts of things. That's why I think the technical complexity is a little bit higher. It's definitely higher with a bubble test than a full failover. You're hitting the button and things are going to come up, right? Honestly, it's kind of low in terms of I am replicating all these things. I'm hitting the button to fail over, go. But I think, Sam, we kind of need to talk about one key piece of this whole failover process, and that's the network.
So we're talking about what are the technologies and methods of disaster recovery that Nutanix supports. And I think when you're looking at this pendulum or arrow demarcation, we'll take the far left and the far right off the table. So typically the far left is doing some kind of BCDR with a backup tool, third-party tool, which Nutanix supports, but you're really using a backup tool to do DR. And then to the far other end of the spectrum, we support down to RPO 0, which would be sync or metro. There are some network dependencies associated with that. And typically those go more into continuity than disaster, because since your RPO level is so low, your data is synchronizing to your other locations, or in a metro design, for lack of a better word. So in many cases, in those scenarios, you're doing it to maintain a service level around an app or a service, more so than necessarily a disaster. And it all depends comes down to what your business requirements, et cetera. But generally speaking, most of the DR footprint lands in the middle of the three, what we're talking about here. And we're talking about, 3 distinct technologies that we have in Nutanix between MST, sync, async, and near sync. And really, our MST technology, it's really a snapshot-based technology, and what it allows you to do is it allows you to take snapshots directly to our S3 product, and that gets you down to a 1-hour RPO requirement. And it's really just protecting those workloads to a 1-hour RPO, but we would tell you 1 hour or higher would be the typical use case in that scenario. And then when we get to async and near sync, those are really just getting to those applications and really what your service requirements for the services in those applications. From an RPO 1 hour down to the 15-minute interval level in near sync. So it just gets into the frequency and the rate of change. And the point here is to show that Nutanix supports the range depending. So ultimately, the conversation here is where are your business requirements and what can Expedient do to meet those business requirements? Because from a Nutanix perspective, our technology supports the range. So the good news is when you're partnered with Expedient Nutanix, your workloads are protected from the highest level of complexity in terms of technology to the lowest level of complexity. You can pretty much achieve whatever business outcome you have towards your RPO and ultimately your RTO requirements.
And we like to think about this as really optionality and being able to fit the right RPO, RTO to each workload at the right cost. Because as you move left on this diagram, you are going to be saving money because MST just requires less hardware than async or near sync to achieve. And so if you can think through on a per app basis what you need and move different apps into different buckets, there is some cost savings available to you.
Yeah, the lower you get from your RPO to your RTO requirements, especially when you get to RTO, the dedicated need for compute resources is necessary. And regardless of that, point here is you don't have to use different technologies. You can just use Nutanix's technology to achieve the outcome. And so as we go forward, the first one that we had on the list was our MST technology. What we have here is just a high-level diagram, conceptual diagram that shows how you mix MST and pilot-like clusters. On the left, we have two end customers. On the right, we have Expedient's data center. And what we're showing compute clusters that are done in an economic way, we call pilot-light, and the use of our S3 technology to target workloads that have differing RPO types to land in both technologies to achieve the outcome you need as a business. So the point of this diagram conceptually is that Expedient is using multiple technologies powered by Nutanix to kind of meet the business outcomes that you need as a customer. And moving on, similar to the previous, in this diagram, we're showing where you are using both a mixture of pilot-light MST with our S3 objects and then on demand. So everything similar to the prior example that I provided. The only difference here is if a customer doesn't have the capabilities of hosting a pilot-like cluster, doesn't have the funding to support a pilot-like cluster, Expedient can host all your workloads and protect them in our S3 technology, and then on demand hydrate those workloads into a pilot-like cluster to conduct a DR test or an actual failover event. And that RTO will really be driven between you and Expedient in terms of what on-demand means.
Yeah, now we finally get to talk about networking. So another key decision point when you're thinking about DR, whether or not it's with a service provider, although that might affect your decision whether or not it is with a service provider, is whether you're going to re-IP your applications or not. So what we have here is just a simple diagram of your IT environment and your DR environment during regular operations. Your apps are on the left here, living in prod, and they're being replicated over to the DR environment on the right. Prod and DR are configured with different networks, and DNS is pointing your users to production currently. Now, your prod environment has failed, and you need to get your users over to the DR environment. In this diagram, you are doing that by not making any network changes, but rather just updating DNS and updating the configuration of whatever application layer the DNS is pointing to, whether that's your applications or the like a load balancer. We're calling this failover with re-IP because we're thinking about it from the perspective of your application owners. If you're going from your data center to a service provider data center, this is probably the best approach. And depending on how you're doing things in production, it might also be the simplest for your network team.
Yeah, this is the key
but-
thing that we see most people doing because the public IP space, they own it or they have their
Mhm.
ISP that owns it. So changing a public DNS record is the way that they do that failover. To if once it comes over, it can come out of a public IP space from us, and then you're updating the DNS record with the public IP from us. But I think this is one of the things that we see a lot of folks see, and they go, "Ooh, actually, could we avoid that?" And that's where the failing over without the IP comes in.
So networking is really simple in this model, but it can be complex for your application owners, especially if there is any sort of hard-coded IPs anywhere in your application stack. This might not work for you, which is where we have the failover without re-IP approach. So now when pod fails, we are making network changes, routing changes, and mirroring your prod network in the DR environment. And everything can keep working the same way it was before, but now we've put all of the responsibility on the networking team to mirror the networking. Make things easy for your app owners. So I talked earlier about selecting a service provider before you get too deep into solutioning with that service provider. I think, especially if you're looking for Nutanix DR as a service, there's some key questions to ask to help you select the right service provider. And I've categorized those into 3 different buckets, which I call believability questions, technical questions, and service questions. All of these are aimed to help make sure the service provider you're talking to matches your business and is a good partner for your business. So believability. So the link there on the left takes you to a guide with a lot more questions that hopefully hit most of your use cases. But these are some key ones that I would ask every time. So if you're working with buying a Nutanix centric service, make sure that you're buying it from a Nutanix certified service provider so that you know, as Parham talked about earlier, that they've jumped through the hoops. They've made sure that their business, Nutanix is validated, that they know how to deliver Nutanix services and that they have people who know about Nutanix working for them. Another important one is to ask about reference customers. Do they have them? Can you talk to them? Can you hear do they have other customers who are going to give you a positive review of their services? Are you the first? Or are there other customers, people they don't want you talking to? And then do they offer opinions? So as you're talking to them, are they just asking you questions and then coming back with suggestions based on your responses? Or are they actually offering opinions based on their experience about the right way to do things? And if they're not doing that, then you are not taking advantage of that massive difference in experience they have from you, because they're basically making you design the environment by asking you all the questions. So they should really be offering you opinions, and then like where there are questions where you need to make a right or left decision, they can give you the pros and cons of each and help you make an informed decision in those cases. But if they're just trying to say yes a bunch and make you make all the decisions, you're not getting the full value of a service provider. Technical examples. A big one that I would ask about are there components of the service that you're looking at that are shared across customers? Which components are shared, and are those shared components oversubscribed? And if they're oversubscribed, is there any guarantees of how much they're oversubscribed, especially with a DR service where you're not going to be using it day in and day out? You need to know that it's going to be there when you need it, and it's going to perform when you need it to perform.
We'll
So
wrap it up.
all I would say on top of that, AJ, is, and you brought this point up earlier as we wrap this up, is also ask about how many tests they conduct in a year among the service providers. Do they actually have SKUs around their DR service that they're offering to you between different tiers, or are you building their SKUs for them as a customer? So really those types of questions, kind of along with what Sam's got here on screen, kind of show the maturity level and the expertise level that a service provider has. Ultimately, going back, AJ, to your example, which is, can you change the oil? Yes, you can. Do you really want to partner with someone who does it all the time and who can do it fast and has the experience? That's ultimately the outcome. You don't want to go in as a customer having more experience than your partner.
Yeah, and I think that's also kind of where the SLA comes into play. If they're doing this all the time, they have an SLA. They have a service level agreement. And what is their percentage of uptime? How often do they pay? These are the things that we answer with, it's 100%, and we want to make sure that you're taken care of. And we want to build the solution that fits your needs, not fitting you into our solution that we've built for a generic set of needs, right? And all of these things align to choosing the right service provider. We answer all of these very well because we've been doing this for a very long time, and Nutanix is the latest technology that we've added to the portfolio. But with that, we're going to send it back to live Q&A because we want to hear from you, and we'll take that there now. Awesome. We are now live. I want to thank Sam and Parham for their time. Sam is actually back with us for Q&A time. Parham wasn't able to make it, but we did have somebody on as well from Nutanix. We have Greg Nussi, who is a senior systems engineer. Hi, Greg. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Sam, welcome back.
Thanks, AJ. How's it going?
It's going good. I think let's go ahead and take the first question here. That was a really, really great presentation, but we also got a ton of questions in the pre-registration. The first one here is, how is Expedient managing this with your hosted cloud IaaS solutions? This is part of our overall optionality, right? We've been doing VMware as a service. We're now doing Nutanix as a service. So we're delivering this as a private cloud environment, dedicated cluster. You're able to do failover into our environment, but we are maintaining all the hosts, but those hosts are dedicated to you along with that storage. Sam, I don't know if you want to dive any deeper into the Prism Central piece there.
Sure, but one point I want to make first is just that because we have, it's potentially overlooked, because we do both VMware and Nutanix hosting, you have the option with Expedient of doing a combination if you're just trying out Nutanix for the first time, if you're transitioning from one to the other, or if you just want to run both. All of those are options. What was the Prism Central question? Sorry, saying that got me off track.
So we're able to kind of integrate into a customer's Prism Central, right? We deploy Prism Central, we configure it over to that side, so you have a contiguous look to the environment.
Yeah, so our private cloud is running just the same Nutanix software you would run on-prem. As you mentioned earlier in the presentation, we're running NCI Ultimate and CM Starter. And our cloud solutions are co-managed, which means customers get access to manage the Prism Central that is running at Expedient. When they're doing on-prem DR to Expedient, we go through the same AZ pairing process that the documentation calls out for on-prem to on-prem DR. And it's all the same functionality you'd be familiar with if you've done that. So you can see all of your replication, how you're maintaining your RPO targets if there's any issues. You can see all your protection policies, all your recovery plans right from the Prism Central you're already using to manage all your infrastructure today.
That's awesome. And by the way, if you have any questions that you have off the top of your head right now, right here is this QR code. You can scan that QR code, submit a question live, and we'll see if we can get it answered here. Let's go to the next question. Next question here, Greg, I think you probably have some thoughts around this one. What are the number one and number two superpowers of Nutanix? I'll let you take this one.
So it's the number one thing that Nutanix provides, and this is one of the reasons that Expedient has chosen as one of their solutions, is that it provides a cloud-like operating model of where you choose where you want to run it, whether that be an edge solution, whether that be with somebody like Expedient, on-prem if you want to do kind of a hybrid thing. It's really about customer choice of where you deploy your workloads and what type of infrastructure you deploy it on. That's really the number one. The second piece is, and again, this goes back to one of the reasons that Expedient has chosen it, is it really makes infrastructure invisible. It's about the software, it's about providing outcomes and not worrying so much about components and availability. Those are handled for you by the software. Make the infrastructure invisible.
So if Nutanix were choosing would you rather be invisible or would you rather fly, they're choosing they would rather be invisible. Got it.
That's a good way to put it.
Had to throw that out there. Let's go to the next question. Does Nutanix allow for external storage? I keep hearing that's coming, and I'm excited. Sam's going to join us back here in a moment. But one of the things that we saw at .next, Sam's back, is that Nutanix has now partnered with Pure Storage. This was a huge announcement at .next. Pure being one of the leaders of the storage industry, if not the leader in the storage industry, partnering with some of the best infrastructure platforms in the industry. And I think, Sam, I think we can talk a little bit more about that Pure and Nutanix story here, but we got a couple little shout outs in there as well.
Yeah, I don't know, Greg, if you want to jump in with any updates on how that's going, feel free. Expedient is today already a elite partner with Pure. We're using their storage quite a bit already. So we are particularly excited about this opportunity to put two of our favorite partners together and have kind of the best of both worlds. We are working with Nutanix and Pure. We will be members of the early access testing team that is getting started pretty much right now. So we should this summer have this running in our labs and put it through all the paces. I would say our goal is to have this available on Expedient as soon as it is supported by Nutanix and Pure. That's what we're shooting for. It opens up a whole bunch of new options for existing Pure customers and existing Nutanix customers, and we're excited to bring all of those options to the table.
Yeah, I would just
Greg.
Yeah, I would just add, I couldn't be more excited. The little secret is that Expedient has been asking us about when are you going to support Pure for quite some time. So we're here. It's great. It's announced. Expedient is, I'm so happy that they are partnering with us and Pure to be on the leading edge of that. And that's just something I think that is going to make a better product available to the marketplace out there. So couldn't be more excited.
Yeah, and even there was an interview released during .next between the CEO of Pure and the CEO of Nutanix where they were talking about this and specifically called us out by name. So we appreciate them for that. Let's go to the next question. Can DR be automated with this offering? And I think the short answer is yes, but the bigger answer is automated with assistance. Not just, hey, here's a check that is going to do a failover, but specifically more, hey, I need to do a failover. How do I do that? Can you help me get that done? Can you help me ensure that it works, even if the automation doesn't work as well as it should? I think that's really the big differentiator here between just here's two Nutanix clusters and doing a failover and leveraging a service provider like Expedient to do that. Sam, I think this is where a lot of what we built around this wasn't just the technology angle, but also the service itself.
Yeah, so I think the first thing I'd say is just if you want to take advantage of all the automation features, you do need the Nutanix Advanced Replication or NCI Ultimate licensing. Once you have that, the whole process can be extremely well automated, including some parts you might not even think about. So like managing RPO and when stuff goes down, failing it over, those parts are pretty obvious. But the automation also includes things like a different set of steps for testing and cleaning up those tests. And you can also configure the DR using categories in Prism Central so that like when you add a new VM, it gets picked up by your DR policies if you add it to the right categories, which you're even automating to make sure that new VMs are covered under DR. If you have a lower tier of licensing, you have to it's more of a do-it-yourself automation. It's not all built in. There's still automation you can do, but regardless of your approach, we can help you with it. Whether that's helping you set up all the protection policies and recovery plans and scripts, post-execution scripts you want to run. Expedient can help you with all of that. And then kind of, as we talked about in the presentation, all the other pieces around it. So Nutanix is doing a really core part of the failover, but they're still making sure all of your networking is working, DNS, that sort of thing. So we'll think of all of those things, help you plan out a run book, and work with you to test it.
Greg, anything to add there before we go to the next question?
Yeah, I would just add that for most use cases, you want to get it. Automation is good; it's everyone's friend, and you really want to get it down to basically what I like to call the big red button. Are you sure you want to do this? Yes, and then you kind of watch the process go, and you go through the flow. Everything comes up online. if you have specific applications, and again, the outcome is always what's the application driving. If you have really, really critical applications where, not only is RPO important, but RTO is critically important. As AJ talked in the presentation and Parham talked in the presentation, some of the metro type solutions might be more applicable for those really specific use cases where that's a need.
So let's go to the next question here. We already use Nutanix in our prod and secondary data centers. Curious if we could get rid of our secondary DC and use you all somehow. Absolutely. This is one of the key things that Sam and Parham went through, is replicating from on-premises to us. Between our data centers, we can do all of the networking failover. Between on-prem and DR, there is a better and easier way to do that. Sam, do you want to dive into that a little bit more?
I mean, we covered it pretty well, I think, already from a detail standpoint, but I would just add that this is a very common use case this is where a lot of our customers came from. Running a second data center, for all the reasons we already covered, is expensive and difficult. And so using Expedient to offload all of that work to us makes your lives a lot easier, and oftentimes can save you money.
Yeah, I think this is definitely something we want to discuss further with you. So if you scan up there for the QR code, there's also a Let's Talk page that you can reach out to us, and we can definitely talk through, what are you doing today in that secondary data center? Because it's not just the Nutanix piece. There's other stuff that lives in that secondary data center, whether that's physical hardware, or you want to run domain controllers, or a secondary SQL server, or secondary DNS servers. Those are the other things to consider. So this isn't just a secondary location to go to, but really thinking about that solution overall.
That's a good point. If you have other stuff in that secondary data center, you probably have more than just your Nutanix nodes. We offer co-location, and you can cross-connect directly from the colo into the cloud. So you can put the Nutanix workloads, the VMware workloads in our cloud, and then anything that you need to colo is just a cross-connect away.
Yep. I think we can take one or two more questions before we head out here. Let's go to the next one. After a merger, decision on staying with VMware or continuing down the path of Nutanix. I think this is truly a comfort issue. If you are comfortable staying with VMware and it's worthwhile to you to do that, absolutely. If you're continuing down the path of Nutanix, whether you are the company doing the acquisition and you want to make Nutanix the standard across the board, great. If you are the company who is being acquired and being told that you have to go to Nutanix or you have to switch to VMware, both of those are options from us. And I think that's really where we as a service provider overall come into play. Obviously, we love our friends at Nutanix, but we also have a very strong partnership with VMware as well. And so being able to say what is going to be the best path forward for you, or even blending those two paths together, I think is really where the power of Expedient overall comes in. And being able to leverage Nutanix for what you want to use Nutanix for, and being able to leverage VMware for what you want to leverage VMware for, is really a powerful thing. And it's not necessarily an or question, it's an and. So there's a couple of different ways we can go about that. Obviously, Greg is going to say Nutanix. We don't need to beat around the bush there. But
customer choice is always a good thing, and I will never go against that.
Right. You can still run ESXi on top of Nutanix. You can absolutely still do that. So a number of different paths there as well. So this is where we definitely see it as more of a conversation and understanding what are the business requirements versus just saying blanket technology versus technology. It always comes down to business requirements and outcome. So that's where we're going there. Let's go with one more question. Options for hosting VMs with Nutanix, cost breakdown of the differences of not keeping our own server equipment and moving to a more hyperscale level. Sam, I don't know if you want to jump in on this one, because this was, kind of looking at some of these breakdowns, but a lot of what we see is the time and effort of maintaining any infrastructure yourself can be outweighed by the value you're getting having someone else who does this all the time. But Sam, I don't know if you want to dive a little bit deeper on that one.
Yeah, we also have some scale economies. And like we talked about earlier, especially with DR, we have the option to burst the service, which you aren't going to get doing it yourself. It includes everything you need for the cluster, whether it's prod or DR. So you don't have to buy all the other components and put them all together. So backups, networking, co-location, all that stuff. It's just all inclusive. So I think it's a great deal. I think if you're looking at hyperscale, you're going to be paying more for that compared to hosted private cloud offering like Expedient. So you need to know what you're getting for that more additional expense. And it's also not going to be managed. So part of the value proposition that Expedient offers, you're going to have to fill in on your own. So I would look close. I think most people who think they want to go to the cloud are really looking for something, in most cases, most workloads, more like Expedient than hyperscale. So definitely look at that option. We also have a calculator. I don't know how to drop the link in here, AJ, but if you go out to Expedient's website in our knowledge base, there's a cost comparison tool for our EEC, which is our multi-tenant VMware cloud offering, t-shirt size VMs, our VMware private cloud, and our Nutanix private cloud. So you can kind of tune it to your workload sizing and
Yep. Right down there, you can
you.
scan the QR code.
Perfect.
And you can compare the costs. You can compare both VMware to Nutanix, but you can also compare DIY to us as a service provider. I think this is a really powerful story to be able to go out into the market with, but also we want to help solve your problems. That's really what this comes down to at the end of the day. A lot of people are in a bunch of various situations where licensing is changing, technology stacks are changing, business priorities are changing. So how do we make that easier for everybody? I want to thank Sam and Greg for their time today. I want to thank Parham for his time in the conversation earlier. We're going to wrap up here. Join us next Nutanix. Next month, we'll be talking to our friends at VMware about VCF, bring your own licensing, and some of the things that they have going on there. Please be sure to join us then. Continue to scan the QR code that's over here, over on the right, to get that cloud cost comparison, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everybody.